Hey, Steve here, and in this video I'm going to walk you through almost the full end-to-end processing for this image. I say almost because I've already done the first part, which is to import the file into Lightroom or ACR and just do some basic calibration to the file there. So I haven't done too much, no messing with the colors or exposure or anything like that. But yeah, the purpose of this video is to walk you through the process of editing an image using my new luminosity masking actions to help make the whole process a lot smoother and quicker and easier, so that we get the benefits of those complicated techniques like luminosity masking without the headache of figuring it all out manually. So as I've always said, there's still benefits to learning how to do everything manually, and if you do, then you'll kind of be in a good position to understand exactly what these actions are doing. However, these actions are designed to help speed up the process for people who already know what they're doing with luminosity masking, but also to make it an accessible technique for folks who are new to the concept and haven't used it before. So let's crack on with processing this image. So the first thing I'll do, in my 6-step workflow, we have the first stage, which is to basically import the image. The next stage is to create an even exposure. So that means removing some of the contrast from the image to give us like a good starting point to do our color corrections and contrasts and embellishments on. So to do that, I'll just open up my actions panel, and here we've got the 3 groups that I've grouped these actions into. And the first one that I'm going to use, the first thing that I want to do is actually darken the sky a bit, because it's quite bright and there's a lot of color in there that's just kind of overexposing at the moment. So I want to be able to do that without over darkening this already dark center section. So to do that, I will pick I'll use my selection only lights 1 action, and I'll run that, and that's going to create a selection that isolates the highlights. And then I will use the darkening curve action and run that, and what's going to happen, it's basically created a curve which is going to darken those brightest parts of the shot because of the selection that was active. Now I can double click on this darkening curves adjustment here to now adjust the the effect that this is giving us. So let's darken it quite a bit more, and you can see as I do that, the sky and the foreground are getting darker, but all of this this dark bit through the middle isn't really being affected very much at all. So I think we'll leave it there, and just for demonstration purposes, I will click on this adjustment that we just created, and I'm going to run the show mask action. So now this is basically giving us a look at what the layer mask is doing. So all of the black areas in the layer mask here, this effect of darkening the image is being concealed, and all of the lighter areas is where this darkening effect is being revealed. So using these actions, you can use the show mask or show layer action just to flip between these 2 views, just so that you can get a bit of an idea of what the mask is doing at any given time. So the next thing that I want to do is maybe lighten up the middle section. So kind of the inverse of what I've just done, darkening the top and bottom. I want to lighten the middle. Now there are a few different ways that we could do that, but let's start off this time with a lightening curve. So let's add the lightening curve adjustment just by running that action now. And we'll see here that's now affected the whole image. So we don't want that, we only want it to brighten the middle. Actually, let's just exaggerate that brightening effect a little bit. So I'll double click on that curve and I'll just pump that up a little bit more. Now what we want to do is basically invert the mask now, so I'm going to click on the mask and press Command I on the keyboard, or Control I. And now I want to use a luminosity selection to brush this effect in, just in those darkest parts. So to do that, we need to use one of the actions that isolates the darks. So let's go darks 2. We'll run that action. I'm just going to press Command H, or on a PC that would be Control H, and that's just going to hide the marching ants, but it's going to keep the selection active. And I'm just going to use a white brush on about 50% opacity, and I'll just start brushing in to the middle section here, and you can see that that's lightening it up. And I'm going over the edges quite severely into the sky, but because of that luminosity selection that's active, it's not the brush stroke isn't affecting the sky at all. And again, we can see that if I just click on the layer and run the show mask action, we can see here, okay, so it is going into the sky a little bit, but nowhere near as much as it would if I didn't have that selection active. And just going back to the layer, I don't think that's really having much of a negative effect as it is. I mean, we could tidy the selection up a bit. Let's show how we would do that. So let's show the mask again. So to do that, let's I mean, you can just use the black and white brush in the mask here, but we don't always if it's getting a bit close to the edge, then that's going to defeat the point of using the luminosity selection anyway. So let's use the dodge and burn tool. So I'm going to use burn, because we want to make these grey sections, or these grey parts of cloud here, we want to make those black. So I'm just going to deselect my current selection, Command or Control D. I'm just going to brush to get rid of those grey clouds. Now, because I'm burning, and I'm burning on the midtones, what this is allowing me to do is to darken these greys without affecting these whites. So because the whites of the mountainside here are almost pure white, I can brush over the edges here, and it's not going to do anything, because it's only this brush is only going to affect the midtones, and they're virtually pure white. So let's just flip back here. I kind of went a bit off the track there. Yeah, so now this adjustment here, lightening curve, is lightening that middle section up quite nicely. So it's much flatter image than the original. So this is without those two adjustments, and this is with. It's much flatter in contrast, but we can see that the color has come back into those highlights, and we've got a bit more detail to work with in the middle section. Now from here, the next stage in the workflow would be to do any color adjustments or color corrections. I'm not going to do that right now, because I quite like the colors in this image, so that's kind of an optional step really. Let's just go back to the brush tool. So the next stage in the workflow is to add contrast and drama to the image. So we've got a few actions that we can use to do that. Now I quite like this image when it's processed towards the darker end of the scale. So what I'm going to do is run this multiply action, and you'll see what happens when I do that. It basically darkens the image in a really nice way. It gives those nice colors in the sky, it really saturates them quite nicely. However, this is a little bit too strong in the not in the foreground, in the middle section here, so it's a bit dark. So again, what we're going to want to do is brush this effect out of that area. Now, one cool thing that we can do with these actions is, if we have a layer mask that we've created already that has got the selection that we want to reuse. So let's go back to our lightning curve and show mask. So I've got this layer mask here, and that is creating a selection that is pretty much a perfect match for what I want now to be able to use. So if I click on here and click load mask as a selection and run that action, then what it's going to do is load this mask here as a new selection, so as a luminosity selection that I can now brush through into this multiply layer. So just with a black brush, I can, let's go down to 30% opacity. I can brush in here in the middle and kind of remove some of that darkening effect that the multiply adjustment has given us. And again, because of the selection, I can quite happily go over the edges and it's not going to affect anything outside of that selection. So that's quite effective just like that. So let's have a look at the net effect of this multiply adjustment now. So again, just a really nice darkening effect, but not too dark there in the middle that we lose all the detail. Okay, so let's make another contrast adjustment. This time I'll look at adding some contrast into the middle here. So it's in keeping it light compared to the sky and the foreground, it kind of seems a bit washed out still. So yeah, let's add some contrast in there, and I'll just run the contrast levels 1 action just as a starting point. So that's added a bit of contrast, and keeping in mind that I don't really care what it's doing in the sky at the moment, because I'm not going to use that. It's going to be masked out by the time I finish this adjustment. We're only concentrating on what this adjustment is going to do to the middle section. So now I've got that as a starting point, I can just double click that and adjust these points here just to tweak the contrast in that middle section. So I think this, we're adding a bit of lightness and a bit more, a bit more contrast generally, so it kind of makes it pop really quite nicely. As we can see here, completely overexposing the sky, but that's okay. So now, with that done, I think it's going to be easier to invert the mask. So Command or Control I. So I'm going to make that mask black to invert it and completely hide this effect. And now I'm going to brush the effect in to those areas that I want it. So again, we've already got a selection, or we've already got a layer mask that looks a lot like what we're going to want the layer mask for this adjustment to look like. So that's lightning curve 1. So again, I could just go and activate that, or click on this adjustment and then load the mask as a selection. But yeah, just to demonstrate another way that you could use the actions to create the mask that you want, let's do it a different way. So this time, because we're looking at the dark section or the dark parts of the image, let's choose darks 3. So I'm going to run the darks 3 action, and now I'm going to run the build mask from selection action. Okay, so this gives us a view of what this mask will look like, or this selection was going to look like. And what I want this to end up looking like is something that's going to isolate the middle section from the sky, because I want to be able to brush over the edges without affecting the sky. So there's a few different ways that we can manipulate the mask now. A good one to try is just going to the image menu, then adjustments, and then levels. And we see the levels box has popped up here, and we can apply this levels adjustment directly to this view of this layer mask. So what we're going to look for is a setting that we can land on that is going to create a really nice isolation across the top of the mountains there. So I think we might struggle a little bit. Oh no, that's not too bad. I was going to say we might struggle a little bit just up here in this top corner, because that's quite they're quite similar in brightness. But I think that is probably going to do us quite nicely. So let's settle on this. So we've got a nice isolation along here. So let's say OK to that. And now, just because these houses are quite bright, what I can also do, just to create a really good selection, is just with a white brush now, because there's no real threat that I'm going to go over the edges where I don't want to be going with this now. I can just brush this out through the middle. It doesn't have to be 100% perfect. but yeah, that looks pretty good. So now this selection, if I run the use mask action now, it's going to load that as a selection. And now I can press Command H or Control H, and with a white brush I can brush through this middle section here and reveal the this contrast adjustment only in this dark middle area, thanks to the luminosity selection that's active. So it took me a little bit longer to explain it than it would actually take to just do this. Yeah, so you know, this is actually a time-saving technique, but yeah, like I said, it just took a couple of extra steps to explain. Now the next thing, let's I mean, it's already looking pretty good. If we just compare these four, or compare the image with these four adjustments to the original image, and I can see it's quite a good transformation already. Let's just see. I think I might prefer it if the top of the sky here was just a little bit darker, and maybe the bottom of the water here too. So let's add a darkening curve, and let's see. Don't want to go too dark. But now, like I said, I only want this in the top and bottom, so we can invert the mask. And with the white brush, I'll just brush that in there. We don't need a luminosity selection for this because yeah, I can just go freehand and we're not worried about going over the edges of anything here. So just darkening that top off, and then maybe just this bottom corner and then bottom edge here, just to kind of add that little bit of a vignette effect. So there we go. And now maybe just to make that middle section pop even more, we can just give another levels adjustment a go. So I'm just adding a levels adjustment there, and that pops quite nicely, I think. So again, let's invert the mask, Control or Command I. And this time I will just use this mask here that I created in the contrast levels 1 adjustments. So knowing that this adjustment here only affected those middle areas of the image, another thing that I can do with the actions is to click on the one that I want to copy, and I can just click and run the copy mask action. And now I can click on the levels adjustment and click paste mask. And now we'll see that that layer mask has been applied, so that this final contrast adjustment is only applied in that middle part there. So I think that'll probably do it for contrast adjustments. Yeah, that's popping quite nicely now. So the final thing that I would do really is just a quick sharpening layer. Actually, no, I've forgotten one thing that I wanted to do. So over here in the left, you see the sky is quite overexposed. So I'm just going to fill that in with a bit of color. So this isn't necessarily anything to do with the actions, but just another little tip for you. So to do that, I'll create a new blank empty layer, and I'll change the blend mode to darken. And I'm going to hold Alt or Option on the keyboard and just sample a yellowish color, yeah, like a light yellow color from the sky here. So something that's going to look half decent if we just filled this area in with that color. And I'm just going to run that through this area a couple of times. Now, depending on the size of the area that you're coloring in, you might need to clone some texture into this into that area. I can just about get it away with just brushing a color, brushing a brush into that area there. But the reason we put it on the darken blend mode is because it's only going to brush into the whiter, or the parts of the sky there that are lighter than this yellow color that I've selected or sampled. So you'll see if I change this now from darken to normal, all I've done is just brush a big blob of that yellow color across the sky. But the darken blend mode makes sure that that is now only applied in that bright white part. And yeah, what you can also do if that's a bit too much is just reduce the opacity of this layer also. So that looks pretty good. And then yeah, the final thing that I would do in the workflow is just tidy up any little things that I want to clone out. There's not really anything in this image that I would deem needed removing. And then yeah, just sharpening and resizing and exporting. But yeah, I won't. Yeah, there's no need to really show you those. The main idea here, like I said, was to run you through how these actions can help you create a finished image using these advanced luminosity techniques a lot quicker than you would if you were doing them manually. So yeah, I'm sure you've seen just under this video on the page, you can still get my luminosity masking actions. At the moment, they're $27. So you know, this set of actions as they stand is the first stage in my development of a fully fledged Photoshop panel. So yeah, this really is starting out as a set of actions that you'll have to sort of run. And you know, there is a bit of learning just to figure out what each one of these does. But I've got some some videos and some documents in the members area that will show you how to use them and what each one does. But in the long term, so you know, talking in a few months' time, probably in the new year, probably maybe December, January time, this will be a fully fledged panel for the reason of making this even easier. So you know, everything's going to be lined up in order so that you're going to know what to run and when, as it pertains to my 6-stage workflow. So you'll be able to just run through the processes from top to bottom, stage 1 through to stage 6, using these actions to help you do everything you need to do along the way. So yeah, that's something to look forward to. And when the panel is finished and launched, it's going to sell for $97. It could be more depending on how much of a large project it becomes. But yeah, like I said, at the moment you can get this for $27 to get these actions. And if you do that now, then you'll get automatic free upgrades to all the latest versions, including the panel when it's released. So you know, it's still a really good deal now to get these for $27. You can do that either through PayPal or just using the order form below this video. So yeah, I hope you found this video useful. Thanks for watching, and I'll speak to you soon.